Imagine you open your tap and out with your water come little fish, tiny crabs, maybe a whole eel, and stuff that could kill you. Today I'm going to tell you a tale about a totally preventable catastrophe. Welcome to Hamburg. This story is about Stan. Stan is the name I gave a bacterium. In history he is also called the Blue Death. Stan is part of the cholera family, and he has only one dream in life: to spread. And boy oh boy, did he spread. We have our protagonist, so let's set the scene. First things first, Germany has a coast. It has two coasts, one with the Baltic Sea and the other with the North Sea. It also has 9 borders with different countries. We have Denmark, Poland, Czech Republic, Austria, Switzerland, Luxembourg, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and 2 maritime borders with Sweden and the United Kingdom. And right up there in the north is the city of Hamburg. Hamburg is the most important town at the coast of Germany, and it's the place of our story today. The harbor of Hamburg is still super important and very impressive. When you are in Hamburg, go and visit the Landungsbrücken. It's only a short walk away from the central station. Okay, it's 30 minutes away from the central station by foot, but you'll live. And in the harbor at the Landungsbrücken, you can see ocean liners right in the middle of the city. It is nuts. Back in the day, if you wanted to immigrate to the United States, you made your way to Hamburg. And there you got on a boat and then your new life started. So a lot of people left from Hamburg, but also a lot of people moved to Hamburg to find work in this ever-growing town. And most of them found their work in the harbor. On one of the many ships that came to Hamburg, Stan entered the town. He traveled inside the guts of a seaman and left its host, like all good cholera does, through diarrhea. So Stan made it outside. He swam in the water of the harbor, which was very warm and comfy because it was August, and the water of the river Elbe, which connected the harbor to the North Sea, stood very low. So Stan is outside, he has it comfy and cozy, but he knows so close to the coast you would get diluted sooner or later. So Stan started to get worried. And then, as it always does, after the low tide comes the high tide. And Stan thought, bye-bye sweet world, this is it. But wait, instead of being carried out at sea, he was sucked in.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
You see, in 1892, the City Council of Hamburg hadn't managed to install a water filtration system. I mean, they were only added for the last couple of 20 years. What they did manage, though, is to install a piping system that even allowed households from poor working class areas to get water out of the wall. Good old tap water. And where did they get their water from? They got it from the river Elbe, but they got it from that point where the river mixed with the water from the harbor at high tide, with the addition of a little sewage water which had to go somewhere. One moment Stan swam in the harbor, the next he was swept up, together with sewage water and water from the river, and all the critters that lived in the river water, and through the pipes of the city they were sucked in. Until he finally landed in a muddy and moldy old water basin in the area that is called Gängeviertel. Stan's new hood was an assortment of old huts and shacks that were built right next to and on top of each other. Back then, Hamburg closed the gates to the city at night, and workers didn't want to live outside of the city walls because they needed to be at work at time and they needed to get to their beds after they finished their shifts. So the workers needed a place to stay close to the harbor. And the rich people with houses close to the port said to them, you can live in my backyard, you can live in my garden, build yourself a little something and give me a little something for my troubles. So pay me rent, basically. So the workers built themselves, let's say, tiny houses without any luxuries in the backyards of the big and beautiful houses of the rich people. If you wanted to get to your tiny house, you had to pass through the gates of the big and beautiful houses. And when you did, you saw to your left and to your right all the shacks or tiny houses that were built by people like you. And all that was left to navigate to get to your tiny house was a small alleyway or a narrow corridor. And that is where the name for this area, Gängeviertel, came from. So Gänge means corridor or small pathway, and Viertel is a quarter, a neighborhood. So a neighborhood full of narrow alleyways. The more people came, the more shacks were built. After there was no more room to build them right next to each other, they were built on top of each other. And if you lived there, your tiny house had about 10 square meters or 107 square feet for you and your family, and in our story, Stan. One visitor said about the Gängeviertel back then, "This is a labyrinth of houses and shacks, dirt and misery." Just imagine the smell. These were not fancy living situations, but the working class needed housing. And the Gängeviertel was connected to the water piping system, so a lot of these very rudimentary shacks and huts had running water. When they opened their tap to get water, out came a cocktail of sewage water, of harbor water, and the water you were aiming for, the water from the river Elbe. But without a filtration system, you got all the dirt from the sewage and the harbor water, but also all the critters that lived in the river Elbe. Everything came through these pipes. So you got little fish, snails, tiny crabs, maybe a whole eel. It was not uncommon that there was so much stuff in your pipes that they got jammed. And in the summer, in August of 1892, out of your tap water came also the cholera bacterium, our protagonist Stan. So Stan was inside your home, and Stan was thrilled because there were so many people living so close to each other. And these people did not only live close to each other, they lived in houses that were not insulated and that were built basically on the waterfront. So it was always moist, it was moldy, there were a lot of people, there was not a good bathroom system, as you can imagine. And Stan infected the people, they got sick. And what do you do when you have cholera? You vomit, you got diarrhea. And how do you clean yourself up? You use the water that comes out of your tap. So there was this whole circle of life for Stan where he could just thrive. So Stan did what he was made for. He infected people. Stan got into people and out of people. He got back into the water system and into new people and into new homes. Stan moved into so many houses, and very soon not only the poor citizens fell ill, but also the richer ones. But the poor, they got it the worst. The city council was warned by doctors that Stan, or cholera, was in town, but business was good and the harbor was so important that they didn't do anything about it at first. They even let a ship aimed for the US full of European immigrants who were partly infected leave the harbor. And that is how Stan moved to the United States in 1892 as well. But Stan got greedy. When he started out at August 14th, only a handful of people fell ill. A couple of days later, at August 22nd, over 1,000 people were infected with cholera, and the citizens who could started to flee the city. The government in Berlin heard about Stan's success story, and they sent their top man to investigate, Robert Koch, later to receive the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. Koch was the guy to investigate infectious diseases. And when he arrived in Hamburg and went for a walk and had a good look in the Gängeviertel, he exclaimed, "I have never encountered such unhealthy apartments, plague caves, and breeding grounds for every infectious germ as in the so-called Gängeviertel that I was shown at the harbor. I forget that I am in Europe." Koch made it official. This is cholera. So Stan was found out and from now on hunted down. They sealed off the harbor and finally sped up the installation of the filtration system. They closed down the schools, they cancelled all events and assemblies, and traffic on land and on water came to a standstill. But Stan didn't give up without a fight. To keep up with his speed, they needed to build barracks in front of the hospitals so that they could isolate and treat the cholera patients there. But they had another problem. When this epidemic started, when Stan started out, they had only 4 ambulances for the whole town. So they were now in a hurry to remodel cars so that they could transport all the ill to get to their treatment. Gravediggers were sent to the newly opened Ohlsdorf Cemetery, the largest park cemetery in the world, to dig up graves in day and night shifts. Flyers were given out to the citizens of Hamburg with instructions on how to keep up hygiene. Cars with boiled water were sent into all the neighborhoods so people had safe water to drink, wash and clean. School gyms were repurposed as disinfection points so you could bring everything you could carry over there so it got disinfected. Because the city was basically under lockdown, a lot of citizens lost their jobs. And some people switched to selling miracle drugs to panicked citizens and make a little bit of money out of the misery. Even though everybody did their best to fight Stan, he was a tough opponent. Because of a lack in resources and people, sick patients had to wait for almost half a day before they were picked up and brought to hospital. Many of them died before they even reached the hospital. The hospitals themselves needed desperately more staff, so they reached out to other hospitals in Germany and asked for medical personnel. And a lot of doctors and nurses came to Hamburg to help. The city was filled with people who were either sick, trying to get help, trying to help, or were up to no good. During the worst times, hospitals used moving trucks to transport the wooden coffins with the dead to Ohlsdorf Cemetery, because moving trucks could fit 50 wooden coffins at once. In 10 weeks, Stan infected over 16,000 people. The official number of dead is 8,605. In one city. Unfortunately, it is very likely that the true number of victims is much higher. Most of these deaths could have been prevented. In the neighboring town of Altona, which is today a part of Hamburg but back then was its own city, they had their own filtration system. They had a modern water system, so the citizens had clean drinking water. When Stan visited Altona, he couldn't spread as much. It wasn't possible for this bacterium to infect so many people, because for cholera to spread, you need to ingest it. You ingest it via contaminated water or contaminated food. And how do you treat cholera? By drinking a lot of water and eating a lot of food. Because cholera causes severe diarrhea. So you either vomit or so much fluids and nutrients out of your body that it gets lethal. After 10 long weeks, this epidemic was finally over and Stan had lost. The city finally installed the filtration system, they updated the water system, and large parts of the Gängeviertel was torn down. Hamburg is a left-wing town. It's a working-class town. But it is also a town where people got rich with trade, shipbuilding, and cruises. It has so many lovely neighborhoods that are super diverse, from the very well-off to super nasty ones like St. Pauli, where everyone who visits, including the Beatles, sees more dildos in one place than nowhere else. But I want to focus on a little area, on a little hood close to the Landungsbrücken, where the canal cruises start if you want to have a look around the harbor. This quarter is called the Portuguese quarter. This quarter is part of the Gängeviertel that was torn down after the outbreak of 1982. In many of the former Gängeviertel, new buildings were opened where the rents were too high for the former working class inhabitants to move back in. But the Portuguese quarter remained a working man's and women's area. Immigrants from Spain and from Portugal, as well as mariners from Scandinavia, settled down here. And as a result, what you get here today instead of Stan is excellent food and hospitality. So go to Hamburg and give it a visit. It is an excellent town. If you want a glimpse into the old Gängeviertel, there's a tiny area left. It is called Gängeviertel to this day. They are not in the Portuguese quarter. They're a little further away from the harbor. You see, if you go there, you cannot only see streets like there were in the 19th century. You're also in an area that was taken back by the citizens of Hamburg. See, the buildings in this area stood empty for a long, long time. Foreign investors bought these buildings for their projects, but they didn't go through with their projects. And the citizens of Hamburg needed space to live and to be. So they managed to pressure the city to buy these buildings back. So now this area is a very communal space. It's a space for art, for social work, and for parties. So if you go there, you not only see the historical side, these streets like they were in the 19th century, at the same time you see a very modern side of Hamburg. And I think this area is a beautiful example for the spirit of the citizens of Hamburg. So go and have a look for yourself. I hope you enjoyed the story of Stan, the Gängeviertel, and the city of Hamburg. Next time I take you to a different place with a different story. Thank you very much.